Yeah.
Okay, before I start, just to say, I'm going to speak really just about two issues. I'm not going to speak about the biomass industry in the UK. I'm going to get some facts and figures from Duncan afterwards. I think the two people who were in luck, one is Neil. I'm going to speak about is there going to be, can we do it sustainable? That's sort of my overall topic. Can we have sustainable bioenergy on a large scale or not? And also, Teresa, I've actually got as an example in there about the impact of biofuels on deforestation in South America. So, right. So my first question, the overall question is, can we have a sustainable biomass economy? Can we, we all know that's what's happening at the moment with drugs burning, like many of you will know, drugs burning trees from clear-cut wetland forests, that is really rubbish, and that palm oil biofuels are really bad. But can we do it sustainably? Slide, please. So can we turn this way a little bit? Sorry.
Maybe you want to close the left-hand list of slides.
Yeah.
Actually, put it on slideshow.
There. Yeah. That's. If you click that. No. Sorry. Ollie.
No.
No. That's it. Perfect. Thank you. That's it. Thanks. Right. So the first question: can there be a sustainable bioeconomy? Looking back in history, when we look at the societies and the communities that have ever managed to really live in harmony with nature, without causing harm to without causing lasting harm to the climate or to biodiversity, have actually been societies that have entirely or primarily relied on biomass for the vast majority of their energy needs. So the first example, one example here is what people imagine the garden cities in the Amazon would have looked like before the colonialists arrived and before the genocide of indigenous peoples in South America. Where really, people imagine, really having quite that they found architectural remains of, really quite large cities that relied on what we would imagine, like what we would call permaculture growing today, with clearings in forests that didn't harm the forest overall, and then left behind soils that are amazingly fertile, a lot more fertile than the soils that they would initially have found. So, those is an example of really amazing society of the past. And the other one is, nomadic societies in Tibet and Himalayas who don't have any, they don't really have trees there, but they rely on yak dung, on animal dung, really for all their fuel. Okay, next slide, please. But the big thing is that really, when we look at societies that have tried to use biomass and especially wood to not just meet people's very basic survival needs for fuel, but they have used wood for industries or proto-industries on a larger scale. There's really, I couldn't find a single example of a society that has done that and not caused massive deforestation. And there's a picture from from Gilgamesh, the ancient Mesopotamian pre-biblical epic, which actually shows Gilgamesh slaying a god sent, one of the gods sent by the Mesopotamian gods to defend the cedar forest of the Middle East from being cut down. So this goes back, thousands of years, and it was actually around that time that they really started to use those cedar forests for shipbuilding and construction, and the pressures of those demands in those days with a much smaller population were enough to really permanently deforest large areas of what had been fertile forest land in the Middle East, and that remains deforested. Next one, please. And just a quick other one, this is Minoan temples, where they were the Minoan civilization, one of the famous ancient Greek civilizations that used forests for bronze smelting, for metal smelting, and they managed to really deforest pretty much all of Crete and much of the rest of Greece. So that's really important to keep in mind, because there would have been much smaller populations with much lower energy need than you have today. Next one. Now, this is really fascinating. It's an essay I found. This is a picture of charcoal making in 16th century England. Now, by the 16th century, England was already facing major wood shortages because, well, just simply there weren't enough forests in Britain to sustain a population of, I imagine, 1 million at the time, probably, if that. With wood for fuel and with wood for charcoal to make metal for iron smelting. So what they did in the 16th century is something that these days we would call sustainable forest management, except that it actually would have been a lot more sustainable than much of what is sold under that name today. So what was an attempt was really that they started to manage woodlands with traditional coppicing, to really meet the wood demand, and in those days, instead of cutting down forests, just doing the traditional coppicing, and that was great, but it was no way enough. It didn't work in terms of supplies. So England became the first country in the world in which to really start relying on coal as a primary fuel source. By 1700, coal had overtaken wood as a fuel, and that's in 1709 in England. The very first blast furnace was invented that used coking coal rather than charcoal. And that's really fascinating, because today Britain is the country that imports the most pellets of any country in the world for energy. And it's really worth thinking that we were also the very first country to move to coal because of massive wood shortages, because a much smaller population just couldn't get by with the wood on this island. So there's a certain historic irony in the assumption that we can just, on a massive scale, go back to wood instead. Next, please. Now, this is from, this is a graph that shows per capita energy use in Europe. And it's important that this is per person. This is not, this is not energy use taking account of the fact that we're now a lot more people than there would have been in around 1500. So what you have here is that for the whole period up to the Industrial Revolution, up to just before,
Okay, there's a shadow back.
Really up to the Industrial Revolution, you have an almost flat line where the total population per year, per person, is about, what's here, maximum of 20 gigajoules. And that would have come primarily from biomass, but not exclusively, as we've seen. In England in particular, coal was played a really big role, and of course, to some extent, wind and water power would have played a role as well. But it's really a flat line until you get really the fossil fuels industrial revolution kicking in. Then you've got this massive scale upwards. And as for Europe, we also, on top of the difference between this and this, we've got 3 times the population now. So somebody has calculated, if we wanted to go back, if we wanted to source current energy need in the way that they were doing here, we would have to get 30 times more biomass out of 1 hectare of land than has been possible to do in the past. And considering that we also have soils that are a lot more depleted today, on top of which we have much more extreme weather because of climate change, that's obviously not very likely. Next one. Now, this I'm afraid is going to be a bit boring and technical. Please interrupt me, because see if you don't get that. But I think that's kind of actually the crux of what is wrong with the idea that we can fuel a significant amount of our energy needs from biomass. And the basic problem with that idea is that essentially the biosphere does not generate energy. The biosphere recycles energy, and the biosphere recycles nutrients, carbon. Well, carbon is energy in that sense. Nature recycles. Nature does not create energy. First of all, on average, only between 2 and 4% of the solar energy that reaches a plant is actually converted into a chemical, into energy contained in that plant later on in the longer term. All the rest is either not usable by the plant or it is lost, what's called during respiration, during the energy conversion within photosynthesis. Now, crops very often only have 0.5% of the solar energy that gets converted into energy inside that plant. Trees are slightly more, towards the 4%. But it is very, very small. Which, if you compare that, for example, to solar energy and solar PV, you would capture a lot more solar energy than a plant can ever do. Now, and when a plant dies, basically in a circle, but then virtually all of that carbon is released again. So, or when plants are eaten, or when plants are decomposed, or of course when they burn down, not necessarily because we burn them, but because of wildfires or so. So, essentially, the carbon that is absorbed by the plant will be returned. Again, it's a cycle. It's part of the carbon cycle, a major one. Next one, please. Now, this I have to apologize for. This really is very technical. You don't have to take it all in. But it is from the third assessment report of the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change. And certainly it's something they have never said since, but it's a really, really good chapter in that particular report, where they actually say is that by definition for an ecosystem in steady state, well, this is complicated. Basically, an ecosystem in a stable state will not sequester carbon, it will not accumulate energy. So the energy taken in by the biosphere is the same as the energy returned by the biosphere. There is no net energy gain. Now they don't say it anymore. Now the IPCC sadly is one of the big promoters of big bioenergy. But you can see why that is problematic. Now, does anyone want me to explain that in more detail? I mean, you don't need to know all the technical terms. Yes? Okay, fine. What they say is net primary productivity is what you call the energy absorbed by the plants during photosynthesis. So what we have seen is net primary productivity is about 2 to 4% of the solar energy that is taken up by the plant to photosynthesis. The rest is lost from the process. RH is called heterotrophic respiration, and that is the carbon released when animals or fungi or microbes decompose that biomass. Dead wood being decomposed, leaf litter being decomposed, plants, composting happening. That is heterotrophic respiration, RH. And NVP is the net primary production, which is all the energy absorbed during photosynthesis, minus what is lost when, through basically what is lost to feed the whole soil biota, to keep the rest of the biosphere going. This is not something like just a carbon loss. This is what's needed to keep soils living, to, without decomposing biomass, you wouldn't have living soils anymore. This is really the main foundation of the biosphere, biodiversity of life on Earth. So, if you deduct this from that, then you have net bioproductivity. That's net primary productivity. So, how much is taken up by photosynthesis minus how much of that energy and that carbon is used up to feed the rest of life on Earth and keep soils healthy. And if you do that, then there's zero. There's zero energy in a healthy ecosystem. There's zero energy accumulation, zero carbon accumulation. Now, this says in a steady state. I have to make a slight explanation that obviously we are not in a steady state. We're in a state with rising carbon levels, and whilst carbon dioxide levels are rising because of all the coal and oil and gas we burn and the forest we chop down, during that time, plants actually take up slightly more carbon than they return. But that is an exceptional state which we are in now in the middle of extreme climate change. But in a healthy ecosystem, you wouldn't have accumulation of carbon. You wouldn't have accumulation of energy. Now, this is bad for bioenergy, really bad news, because it means there is no excess energy that we can harvest by burning plants. But, next please. It is good news for us, because if you imagine that we had a biosphere that kept sucking down carbon and sucking down energy, and that was a kind of plants with a sort of powerhouse that we might like to have if you want to run run our fuel needs that way, we would have, a constant drawing down of atmospheric carbon would have happened over millions and millions of years, and the planet would have looked something like this, which is what people imagined 700 million years ago, the idea of either snowball or slush ball Earth, when you had really global glaciation. You really cannot imagine that you had a biosphere that is like an energy powerhouse and a stable climate. It wouldn't be possible. So it would be, if it happened, it might be good for bioenergy theory, but we wouldn't be around. So next one, please. Is that clear? Can I say?
Why would it change into an ice, permanent ice zone?
Not now, but in the past, if over time, if plants had kept pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, then carbon levels would have dropped. We wouldn't even be around today.
The greenhouse effect would be too low to keep the Earth at a down.